Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Jason Lemelson. Jason is a serial entrepreneur and retail consumer goods expert, obsessed with bringing amazing products to market. He has close to 20 years of experience delivering impactful and beautiful products to the world's largest retail chains. Jason is currently the CEO of two consumer good businesses, Ubio Labs, which is a market leader in mobile accessories, and FLTR, which is a medical supply company formed to address the acute shortage of PPE during the COVID crisis. Both businesses service large retail chains, are operating at scale, and have overseas operations in China. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me, Shauna. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Now I want to get into China, but I'm like, wait, how is that? A whole other subject. And then also the pivoting and the doubling down on PPE, like smartest move ever. Also something we're going to get into. But first we're going to start with rapid fire. You ready?
I am ready.
Okay. If you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
I would tell them to follow your heart and find our humanity again.
I love that. The timing of that answer could not be more true and more authentic. I love it. What is your favorite way to stay healthy?
Definitely weight training in the gym.
Yeah. Good. Are you going to a gym right now?
No, I built a big home gym about 4 or 5 weeks ago, though. I have a couple toddlers at home, so my gym routine has been off track for a couple years. But when COVID started, I built a huge gym at my house.
That's the smartest. When people are saying that they're like way out of shape right now, I don't get it because I'm like, we have more time. We're at home, and it's such a stress reliever.
Oh, absolutely.
That's awesome, and that's the best way to. I agree, to stay healthy.
Yeah.
This is a random question, but I'm like, what's your favorite go-to cereal?
I'm gonna have to say shredded wheats with frosting on it.
Yeah, I was about to say, please don't say the boring.
Oh yeah,
healthy.
no, you gotta have the frosting for sure.
I agree. It's the perfect amount of like soggy and crunchy.
Yeah, and it's healthy enough you can get away with it. Is the other good thing.
Yeah,
it's really
I agree.
Guilt-free in the end.
Well, that's good to know. I need to buy some, not my like all brand. Boring, lame. Okay, what is the best way that you would want to spend a rainy afternoon?
Oh, probably sitting and reading a book, actually. That's one of the greatest challenges I have is finding time to read. If left alone, I think I could sit in my house for weeks on end, just reading consistently. It's probably one of my favorite ways.
Are you reading for pleasure or for like business or self-help or inspiration? Like, what do you read?
None of the above. So I actually read strictly nonfiction. I read an enormous amount of history, political science, and I kind of go in waves every few years. But I spent the last 2 or 3 years reading an enormous amount of history. So I've gone through and literally chronologically gone from the Mesopotamians all the way through, say, the fall of Rome.
Oh, wow.
Essentially. Yeah, so I'm pretty odd. And as far as business books, I don't think I've touched a business book in 15 plus years.
Well, it sounds like in researching you and your success, like you kind of don't need it. You could write your own business book.
Well, I have been told that. We'll see what my future holds. But I certainly don't find business books that interesting because they're not deep enough, really. I did go through a couple years ago and read an enormous amount on Warren Buffett, which was pretty fascinating. So that's part of the last series of books I read related to business, which is the life of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. And those were super interesting. But besides
that's awesome. I'm writing these down because I always love hearing and then creating a collective list of what people like to read. I think it does tell you a lot about people. What is the last gift that you gave someone?
Oh, well, it was just my anniversary at the end of November. So got my
happy anniversary.
Thank you. Got my wife some jewelry. So
good husband. We just had our anniversary also in November, and I got some jewelry. I'm actually wearing it.
It's a winning strategy. I mean, that's an easy one at the end of the day.
You can't mess that up.
I
For
braved them
real.
all. I actually went to Bellevue Square, donned all my PPE, made it happen. I told her, I said, beyond the gift, I've risked my life to get this for you.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully not a shield. You would be, I mean, I wore one I did go on an airplane. I wore a shield. I was literally like the only person on the plane in a shield, but I did feel safe. So, okay. Well, this question I'm going to skip. I was asking what you're currently reading, but maybe what are you currently reading? It is rainy.
Oh, I just started a book on the American industrialists, actually. So a book on Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and a few others. And so, yeah, it
Nice.
starts right at the depth of Abraham Lincoln and just talks about how they built their massive industrial empires.
Wow. I could learn a lot from you. That is not what I like to read, but that's very impressive. Speaking of impressive, what are you impressed by? Like, what impresses you?
That is a good question. I guess excellence in all its forms. So I don't care if I'm watching a world-class gymnast, a painter, a race car driver. What inspires me is people that have devoted their entire lives to achieving absolute excellence.
Yeah, and kind of like that go bigger, go home, like really double down on.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and if you think about what it takes to achieve excellence, it is no small feat. I mean, it's decades of intense focus, working harder than anybody else is willing to work. And I think that's one of the misunderstood things about people that are at the highest level of achievement is how long they've taken to optimize their skill set and how long they took to get to that level of excellence.
Yeah.
And it doesn't much matter the field. As long as someone is operating at that highest level, there's a lesson there and there's inspiration.
Yeah. And if you could pursue excellence outside of business in any kind of field or interest or hobby, what would it be?
Oh, absolutely. Music production. So yeah, my great love is producing music. So I've had a home studio for like 20 years and started my career way back in college in the music industry, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And so I bought a studio shortly thereafter in my early 20s. And at that time I took it and I said, hey, I love this, but I looked at the realistic chances of succeeding and achieving in that industry. It's pretty tough. I didn't like the odds.
It's hard.
Maybe it was a lack of courage. I just figured in business, there were so many opportunities that, hey, I'd find something that I'd learn to do well and learn to make a living. And I was never willing to take the risk in music.
Well, it's not too late. It could be your like 2.0 or 3.0.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I mean, I spend a lot of time in my studio right now. It's like the ultimate pressure valve for me is the gym and the music studio.
Yeah. What kind of music?
I actually do a lot of electronic dance music.
Nice. EDM.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll have to hang out post-COVID for sure.
I'm looking forward to hanging out with everybody post-COVID. I finally started to go stir crazy. I was good for like the first 9 months.
Exactly, me too. I'm like, God, I'm craving like hanging and hugging and connecting, beyond a screen. Yeah.
You should ascend.
Exactly. A big steak. So tell me more about you. Like, where are you from? I can already tell that we would have been friends, and it's not too late now. I'm very drawn to you. So where are you from? And tell me about your
childhood. I was originally born in Phoenix, Arizona. And then I have been up in the Northwest here since I was about 12. Between the time I was born in Phoenix and I got to college up here at the University of Washington, I want to say I moved like 15 or 16 times. So we were moving sometimes every 6 months when I was growing up. And so I've actually lived quite a few places, had a fairly, I guess unstable childhood is one good way to summarize it. I actually had an opportunity to live abroad in Athens, Greece for a number of years and have done so, I think, 3 different times in my life. So I consider myself a Northwest native at this point, being up here since I was 12. I've been up here the longest of anywhere. But at the same time, I spent, up to half of my year in China for a number of years. And so I consider really China my second home. And it's funny how my Chinese staff there always tells me I have a Chinese soul, which I always take as a compliment, given that.
That is a compliment. And do you speak any other languages?
No, I tried to learn Mandarin early, and then I just gave up pretty fast. I said, you know what, I'm not going to master this, and they all speak English, so then I got super lazy.
I took Mandarin of all things in high school, and it is extremely hard, so I can understand that.
They kill you, right?
Yeah.
They'll literally have their different tones, and then you'll listen to it and be like, okay, I can kind of hear a difference, but kind of not. And if you get the wrong tone, you could be really saying something you don't want to say.
Exactly. And so what does it mean to you when people say that you have kind of a Chinese spirit or soul?
Well, I think what it reflects is the fact that when I approached going abroad, the first time I went to Asia, I literally just jumped on a plane. I must have been 25 or 26, and I actually went to Indonesia. And I had to find a flight that I could afford. And that basically meant I had like 5 stops and 36 hours of transit. And so I had I had this little deal for a TV stand with Costco way back in the day, and it was a test order. And so I just jumped on a plane to Indonesia. Never been to Asia, went by myself and landed in Surabaya. And I ended up sort of realizing very early that I was not looking at the roots of Western culture anymore. You know, if we go to Mexico, we go to Europe, we're looking at the roots of our own cultures as Americans, you know, Western culture. And I realized pretty quickly that I was looking at something distinctly different, that, you know, you've got the Chinese minority there, which is Eastern culture, and then you've got the Islamic majority, which is, again, an infusion of sort of East Asian, culture with Middle Eastern Islamic principles. And so I realized I had to have a super open mind. And so I started studying the history of all these different cultures in the world. And so I guess when they say I have a Chinese soul, I guess it tells me I was successful at keeping an open mind, not being ethnocentric, and going in and really learning and understanding somebody's culture in depth. You know, to understand what drives the Chinese way of thinking, you have to start at the beginning. You have to start thousands of years ago and looking at their political structures. Confucianism is super central to understanding how they think about social obligation and community. And so I think that is a big success, you know, because I've seen a lot of people go into Asia with a sort of colonial mindset that, hey, we're here to teach you how to do things. And that's probably a pretty big mistake. I think it's better to show up humbly and say, hey, I have a lot to learn here. No matter what I learn about this culture, I still will never understand them.
Yeah. And there's so many key takeaways. So when you say your childhood was unstable, is that just like speaking geographically, or unstable because why were you moving around so much?
Yeah, so it was unstable in all ways. So yeah, certainly moving a lot is hard because you can't make friends, but really that was driven by just unstable parents, to be honest. And my father was an entrepreneur, always doing something new. He'd have successes one minute and then would be in dire straits the next. So a huge amount of variability in the outcomes and the things he did.
Yeah.
And then my mother is actually an immigrant from a very small village in Crete. And so she grew up literally in 100 square feet on dirt floors. And so
how did they meet?
Well, my mother did end up coming here. So she immigrated to the US when she was 15. And I think they met when she was in her mid-20s. So she was already here. But she left under pretty rough circumstances, as you might imagine. After World War II in Greece, they had a civil war for 5 years after that. So not a great place to be in the late 40s.
Yeah. Well, you don't have the Greek last name. And so, but you could go all different ways just based on your look. A lot of people are like, depending on the country I'm in, think that I'm a native of that country. And so is her maiden name like a strong Greek last name?
Oh, yeah. Mandadanakis.
Oh, yeah. That one. Exactly. Exactly. So are you being raised Greek Orthodox?
Yeah. So I was raised Greek Orthodox. Well, I wasn't raised that way. I later went to the church as an adult. Yeah. My mother's Greek Orthodox. My younger siblings were raised. My mother had kind of gone back to the church at that point. I went back as an adult in my mid-20s, as a matter of fact. I went and studied theology for a number of years. So I was pretty intense while studying theology and just go and travel and stay in monasteries abroad and all kinds of crazy stuff.
I feel like you're like, based on your story, I mean, you're young, but based on your story, I'm like, are you like 90? You've done so much.
I'm an old soul. Yeah, I get bored easily, so I have to continuously stimulate myself. And so I've done
are you the oldest child?
No, I'm right in the middle. I have 6 siblings and I'm dead center.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you didn't have the burden of an unstable childhood where you had to be the oldest and kind of feel that burden of like helping everybody along.
I mean, yeah, the older ones are step siblings. And by the time my family sort of, I guess they really hit a wall really hard when I was in high school. They had a business I was running and lost the business, lost our home subsequently. My brothers immediately younger than me and myself were certainly responsible for generating income for the family at a very young age. I mean, I want to say he was 17, I was maybe 19. And so we had obligations really, really early. And people would say, how did you learn to do what you do? And I said, necessity.
Yeah. Right? And so are you kind of, that makes sense to me. And are you kind of more driven by fear of failure or drive for success? And if so, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, that's changed over the years. So I would say that in my early career, in my 20s, it was absolute necessity. I absolutely realized I had to outrun my past in many respects, not just financially and creating stability. I had to reinvent and discover what it meant to be a husband, a father, to have some semblance of family life that I envisioned that I wanted. So I would certainly say it was fear-driven for the early part of my career. Now, I think the most fortunate thing that happened to me is that my first business that really was successful happened pretty quick, and I was able to get out of the dire and immediate need. And what I learned at that stage was fascinating because I always thought, I was doing this, and if I could just put X amount of money in the bank, or I could just get past this dire need, get out of the startup phase, and I would be happy all of a sudden. And that is the biggest lie of all. Your emotional happiness and the ability to create stable, loving home is unrelated to how much money you have in the bank. And that was a lesson I learned, the first time I managed to put some money in the bank. And so my moves in the beginning were definitely fear-based. And then they've eventually been evolving over time as, my own sort of financial position has changed. They're now starting to focus more on charity, giving. What do I do sort of post-career that isn't just all about another business? And so, there's a significant portion of Filter that has been about helping people. And we have a huge donation program.
I saw that. It's super cool and very inspiring.
Rewarding too. We started donating from minute one here. And so, the reasons I do what I do are changing over time.
Yeah. And it's ingrained, it sounds like, in the culture. But so it sounds like you went to UW, and is that kind of one of those things that's in spite of your kind of troubled and sordid past? Like, that's a hard school to get into.
I'm not sure it was as hard 20 years ago, though.
I know. I went there too, and I'm like, I think that we filled out our application in pencil and just kind of dropped it off. I know. No, it's true. It's so true.
I think it was easier to get into. I was like 20-some years ago now, 25 years ago. So I don't think it was as hard. And so I went to night school because I was running my first business by the time I actually applied to business school. And so I went to night school because I was basically in the entertainment business and out all night. And so the idea of getting up was a virtual impossibility.
Yeah. But do you remember what you wanted to be when you were in college, or like what you were kind of fueled by?
I was kind of a counter-culturalist. I mean, what I was taught in my home, there were some semblances of truth in that about independence, free thinking, think out of the box. But yeah, when I was in college, I was kind of, my thinking was that, hey, most of the stuff I'm learning is not relevant to me. This is silly. If these professors could be doing this, they would be doing it, right? And, I was in night school, undergrad, it's mainly TAs. So I didn't really give a lot of merit to school, to be honest. I was always reading outside of what they assigned. And so a lot of the first couple of years, I didn't really go to classes. I would just sort of review the material before the tests. And so I did not take school seriously at all, to be honest. And then I ended up dropping out of my last quarter as well. I had a second business I had started that took off.
Yeah.
So I ended up dropping out of the UW my last quarter, as a matter of fact. So yeah, I wasn't a serious thinker. I just basically partied and ran businesses and,
Well, somehow you made the right choices, because look at you now. So I'm curious, given your dad's background being successful and having failures, did that kind of scare you as far as pursuing being an entrepreneur yourself?
No, not at all. It actually left me with that being the only option, because I didn't have a model for going to work for somebody else, having mentors. And I wish I did,
Have you ever worked for someone else?
I haven't. I've never had a job. No.
Oh my gosh.
And so I wish that I had, actually. I wish I had taken the first 3 or 4 years of my career and went and got a job and learned from some mentors. So I didn't realize that you could learn an immense amount from mentors, and that, established companies, that there was a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that the fierce entrepreneurial spirit of my father was probably too fierce, in the sense that he didn't put any merit in large companies or education or mentors. And so I think those things were sort of counterproductive attributes that I had inherited that I had to get rid of later. And so those first 5 or 6 years of my career were pretty rough, because I was my own worst enemy, to be frank. And I think just like proper mentors would have really helped back then.
Yeah. But I also sometimes think that you can learn the most from your failures more than your successes. I'm curious what kind of tactics and values you've carried with you throughout these various companies and throughout your career.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the sort of different stages, so I've actually founded 7 companies.
Oh my gosh.
And then one of them was one of my parents' companies, which I wouldn't say I was a founder, but I was one of 3 people that was working on the ground making it happen. So I would say early in the first half of the companies, I would say were my test companies, small scale companies, 4 or 5 employees, you get a taste of revenue, figure out how to do basic things like recruit and payroll and, how to close deals. And so those practice companies, I would say the values there were not the right ones. I was overly aggressive. And that was a lot of, I think, latent anger from various things in my youth and childhood. And so I was aggressive to the point that it was counterproductive. So I was just a bull in a china shop.
Well, especially because that's not, it sounds like they were all in Seattle, and I've worked in different markets, and the Seattle culture is not as aggressive. And so it's like what might have been successful in New York or other markets sometimes can be a little bit different in Seattle, not so much.
That's certainly true. No, I think that's true. I just think I was over the top for anywhere, to be honest. I mean, I was just vicious. You know, I always had this sort of success at all cost mindset, which was not productive in my opinion. And then as I got a little bit older, I would say the last 4 businesses, or about 15 years, have been really, the culture's been rooted in honesty and integrity, and really developing a team that is striving for excellence. And those foundational principles have been part of my last 3 operating businesses, which have been 15 years of my life now. And so I think that, really when you bring people in and say, hey, we're all about, the highest bar, we're going to win, but we're going to win fairly, and we're going to win with a work-life balance. We're going to win with the highest degree of integrity and honesty. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to be excellent in everything we touch. And excellence stands on its own.
Excellence is actually one of our values. And I haven't ever taken, and we've defined it. But I think it's really important to keep it as a backdrop against which you're measuring kind of everything that you do.
Well, measuring is the key, right? So, I mean, people love these words when they get recruited into one of my businesses. They don't necessarily like what it means day in and day out, because to achieve excellence means that you have to get rid of all the superfluous stuff. You no longer have to be impressed by a complex flow chart in PowerPoint, right? That can no longer impress you, because you have to ask yourself, what is the scope and what is the impact of the work you've just done, A? B, how does this dramatically enhance a consumer experience? And so it has to be measurable. And so when you start to measure excellence, that's where people start to squirm, I found. Because not that many people actually want to achieve excellence, because it's painful. It is very, very difficult to be displeased with every output and to just say, great, you did that, now let's raise the bar again. Because excellence is about having it be visible from 100 yards away. You see excellence coming and you know it. But how do you achieve that is the better.
How does that impact you as far as your management style? And would people who have worked for you say, like, this is the toughest boss ever? Or given that you're honest and transparent and ethical, kind of make up for that kind of drive and push?
Yeah, I think people have 2 experiences. So I've got a whole crew of people between China and my US offices that I've been with for, between 15 and 20 years now. So those people are the ones that are all about excellence, transparency, honesty. So I would say one group of people loves the transparency, the drive for excellence, the idea that I push a company very hard, and those people learn a lot and would become a very strong team. I mean, we're not separable as a team. You cannot.
Yeah, it sounds like pretty unflappable. And when you have that type of leader and captaining the ship, it is easy to create that type of loyalty, because I can just tell from talking to you, you have a strong personality, you're clear in your conviction, and people need that. People need that type of like direction and vision.
Yeah. And that's the kind of people that are successful here. But there's a second group that cycle out pretty fast, because they're the ones I think that have never been tested. They've always been in a big company. They've hidden in large organizations. Everyone applauds sort of basic things as opposed to saying what scope and impact look like. And those people have a harder time, because it kind of, the emperor has no clothes on routine.
Yeah. And how do you measure? Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No problem. It's pretty easy, because I'm always focused on very basic things. I don't. It's not easy for me to be sort of misdirected, or for people to obfuscate the facts that matter and the metrics that matter. And so in the end, you sit with certain people that say, oh, I have this 20-year career. I came from these huge companies. What do you know, this founder in these little tiny companies by comparison? And they reject this idea of excellence, or they reject these ideas that there's some semblance of truth and simplicity. And that's one of the things I really took from Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, right? And listen to Warren Buffett talk. And now ask yourself, how many times have you sat in a conference room and listened to people talk and you're like, I have no idea what they're saying. When you don't know what they're saying, it's not you, it's them. Because real brilliance is simple. And you can see that in Bill Gates, you can see that in Warren Buffett, you can see it in Charlie Munger. They speak simply. Jim Sinegal, the founder of Costco, speaks very simply. Because excellence and true achievement is simple. And so that second wave of people reject some of these ideas and they end up cycling out.
And so when I'm saying measuring, obviously internally, but how do you measure externally when you're recruiting people?
Well, that becomes the hard part. I think that, the best thing I can do is be straightforward and honest, tell them that this will be the toughest thing you've ever done. Just take everything you think you know and double the speed and then quadruple the actual output. And then we do that with 1/2 the people. And if you want to learn how we do that, this may be the right place. And I started telling people it's like a mechanical bull now, right? You can prepare all you want to get on a mechanical bull or an actual bull until they open that gate.
You're flying off and hitting your head. And so I know that you've done some mentoring and kind of teaching at UW in the business school, what types of lessons are you teaching younger folks and kind of lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about tactics in those courses because I think that a lot of material they read is on strategy. And so even one of the classes I just did a couple sessions at was a strategy. I actually asked the professor if I could do tactics because I think that's kind of what's missing to some degree. And so on those ones, I kind of go into like 5 or 6 main principles that have worked for me in my line of work, being in consumer goods. And so I can break those down, and some of them are applicable outside of consumer goods. Things like real expertise, and that's always the first thing I talk about. And so I'll do deep dives on things like what does it take to develop expertise? How did I develop it? And ultimately, I make statements like, hey, when you're in an enormous amount of pain and you think you're going to break, that's when you're getting towards learning and being an expert in something. Because expertise is painful. To get to true expertise, you have to walk through the coals.
And how do you create expertise? Because you've been in so many different industries. It's not like there's a consistency. What does it mean to you? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I would say the last 15 years have all actually been the same business, believe it or not. And they're the same business in the sense that we're doing something very simple. We are identifying a gap in the consumer market, determining that there is a meaningful set of enhancements that can happen, functionality or design-wise. Then we systematically bring a product to market at half the cost and twice the speed as competitors to fill that gap.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking of supply chain. Like that seems to be also something to master.
Yeah, it's also, all of the last 15 years of my life has really been consumer goods, Chinese or Asian supply chain, national retail. And so there's common thread in all those businesses. We can repeat this process in a product category, and I've done it in hundreds of categories at this point. I mean, I've sold so many thousands of items to all the retailers. It's actually a process. And that process begins with that gap analysis in the market, then being realistic with you and your creative design and engineering teams as to, do people care about this, right? That's the first criteria. If I build a better mousetrap, does anybody care? And that's a pretty tough question. And so how do you mitigate the risk you made a wrong decision? You find an early market fit fast. And so we actually sell product to the retailers at like design and render stage. And so we've already got the customers before we build the product. And so interesting. Early market fit, it's a totally backward of every consumer goods business in the world. And that's
it sounds like you've got pretty sticky and significant relationships with retailers, which I know in itself is a really big feat. Like it's really hard to get into Costco. Are there any retailers that you can't get into or that you haven't been able to?
No, not really. So if you look at my electronics business, Ubio Labs, last year in 2019, in that single year, we closed Apple stores, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T.
Wow, those are near impossible. Just the sales cycle alone.
Yep, 1 year we got them all because we said we were going to. And so that expertise coupled with focus, that's always my second thing on the list is focus, right? You can't do 12 things well. Dyson builds a great vacuum, period.
And a great hair dryer, by the way. I do have a Dyson hair dryer for $400.
I own it. So yes, I'm aware of that gem.
Oh man.
Amazing.
So what are the other, I guess you're going through the tactics, you said 2, and what are your other ones?
I probably have a list of about 10, but I always start with, real expertise and what does it take? And in those courses, I always like to go into my years on the ground in China. I mean, being in factories till midnight or 1 a.m. every night for, all 5 years of the early career is how you build expertise, going and visiting 50 retail chains a year, traveling, 60, 70 trips a year. After 10 years of that, you have expertise, and it hurts, it's painful, but there's no substitute for it. Focus is another one that is super, super, super crucial. Is really, really focus your organization on its current mission at hand and then measure results before you broaden scope is another big one that I love to touch base on. And so I have a whole list of things depending on which class it is or what the audience is that can get super granular on sort of tactics and how to make things happen.
Yeah, I love it. And so what are your goals as far as like Ubio Labs? And what has your experience been as far as any challenges that you've come up against?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that running a business is always a challenge. The challenges are daily. So Ubio Labs and electronics business today has got all the carrier channels that I just mentioned and Costco and Costco Canada. We have like 24,000 retail doors. We're the third largest in the country. We just expanded all of our product mixes into new categories. And so really, Ubio has been all about managing growth with limited capital. So we've certainly hit walls, short-term challenges. Like when we brought in our new VP product, I said, we make about 15 to 20 unique SKUs a year for Costco and Costco Canada. Now I want to go after the carrier channels. And literally in an 18-month window, we built like 100 brand new items. And so, this guy came in, he's like, Jason, you're crazy. How are we going to build 100 SKUs? And I said, look, I don't want to talk about what's not possible. Why don't we back from a result and back into what would be needed to do it? And we dissected the problem, right? And made it sort of super fundamental. You need an elephant one bite at a time. And so we developed a plan that was pretty granular. And so the challenge at Ubio has just been capital, right? I mean, I only funded the business with like $4 million.
Oh my gosh.
And, we'll probably do 130 or 140 million in revenue next year. And that was $4 million in
total. And it's obviously privately held.
Yep.
And how many like co-founders are there?
None. Yeah. So I'm always the founder of my businesses. The only equity in any of my businesses are the internal team. So yeah, we don't use external VCs, private equity groups, don't have boards of directors. So we're like benevolent dictatorships.
Yeah, you really are unique in that way. And so tell me about building relationships with manufacturers and suppliers. Like what do you do as far as a vetting process? Because I know that can be also like hit or miss.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the beginning of my career, before I had offices in Asia, I would spend a lot of time in China. So I would spend 17 to 18 days per trip there. And I would do that 6 to 7 times a year. And so the first phase of like my 2 businesses ago, it was more like I was running a reverse auction. I was looking for the lowest cost vendors. I had a lot of vendor turnover. That was not very effective. Ubio Labs had a new strategy, as does Filter, which is we wanted more like partnerships on the ground. And so our Asian operations today consist of sourcing, code of conduct and good manufacturing teams and audit teams. And then we have significant quality assurance teams. So we have a really strict vendor approval process that all 3 teams have to sign off on. And so we go and source a broad range of vendors. And what we're looking for is the unique manufacturing capability. But really what we're looking for is alignment with senior leadership, having the company be the right size, right? You don't want like a $20 billion conglomerate where you don't matter. And you don't want somebody who's too small. So we're looking for kind of mid to small, large companies where we're a meaningful part of their business. We're looking for honesty, integrity in the leadership, and really forming a partnership. And so in Ubio Labs, I've got 80% of my product running through 2 factories. And those 2 factories, literally 3/4 of their factories is dedicated to me. And so we go in and we basically say, hey, here's a product line for next year.
Yeah.
They built an engineering team internally for us.
That's amazing.
It's like a partnership. It's not like a traditional vendor relationship. And I'll tell you that the depth of those relationships has made Ubio very successful because we've gone in sometimes and said, hey, we have a special request. We need to not pay you, $3 or $4 million for a month.
Yeah.
And literally just on a verbal, they'll be like, oh, fine. And then conversely.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And they do the same to me. They'll call me and say, hey, we just have to buy all these components from Apple and they have to prepay from their supplier. Hey, can you guys loan us X millions of dollars?
Yeah.
And so like literally we'll just like do that on an email and I'll send them millions of dollars and they'll buy their components and say, we have a very deep level of trust. And that's by vetting the suppliers. My general manager in China is the same high degree of integrity that we are here. And, I've been working with her for about 15 years now. Wow. And so it's just really trust-based, to be honest. It's a little bit unusual and it's contrary to most people's experiences, but we produce amazingly high quality product consistently because we have aligned interests.
Yeah. And so where do you source? I mean, is it all sourced in China?
No, we also work in Vietnam as well. And we moved to Vietnam when the duties were put in place for various categories that we're in over the course of the last 3 years. And so we do have operations, but those operations are being run by our Chinese vendors. So again, we'll go in and say, hey, we need to address this 25% duty in these 2 categories. They'll stand up factories in Vietnam. We'll guarantee we're going to send X amount of business to those factories. And so we spent a lot of time on the ground in Vietnam as well, understanding the dynamics there. And so, but mainly over the years, mostly coming out of China. And now we have some production in Vietnam just because of the duties, because it's a less efficient place to work than China.
Got it. And so moving on, like tell me about Filter, such an exciting company, your timing around all the PPE. And obviously we have a ton of the Filter products in our home.
Well, thank you.
And they are superior. So tell me about Filter.
Yeah, Filter's a pretty interesting story. And it's a story I hope to tell in full at some point because it's pretty unique. It's definitely a case study waiting to happen.
You can tell it in full unless you...
Well, if you want to do like a series of these things, well, absolutely. So Filter entirely came about by accident. So, in January at Ubio Labs, we just finished CES, had a bang-up show showing 100 new items, huge growth plans on the books for the year, and COVID happens. And COVID for us started 6 weeks earlier because we have teams in China.
Yeah, of course.
And so we were following very, very carefully what the government policies were, the R naught or the rate of infection, the fatality rates. And then when we had to go back to work, my Chinese team reached out and said, hey, we can't get any masks here in China. Can you go buy some for us in the States and send them to us? I'm like, oh, sure. Right. We didn't have a single case of COVID yet. So I naively go down to Walgreens and CVS, jump on Amazon, and there's none. So I emailed my general manager, like, hey, I'm sorry, but there are none here. And we didn't even have a single COVID case yet. And so she had to go and source PPE to open our office and to help open our factories. And so at that moment, I realized, A, this was coming here when I started looking at the spread in China. The second thing is that a quick Google search indicated that 90% of PPE was made in China. And 90%, by the way, is in the Hubei province, which was shut down initially. And that when it came here, I did not believe we would have as coordinated a government response, that it would not be under control, and that somebody would need to supply enormous sums of PPE to safeguard American lives. And that was the fundamental basis of the business, is that, I found it at the beginning of March. I was working on it in February, literally before the first COVID case in the US. And so I just had this idea that this was going to be rampant and that someone was going to need to supply billions and billions of units of PPE, and it was all going to come out of China. Yeah. And so the first wave of Filter was really all about N95s. I had this huge team in China. Everyone here was desperate for them back in March and April. And that's where we started. Was we went to all of the N95 vendors in China, understood the testing compliance requirements. I just reapplied on my electronics engineers and compliance people. And we were very early to market at a number of places, but we were in concert with all the states. I was talking to people in FEMA early, state of New York very early. So I was kind of in that mix very, very early. And I was hoping to have a bigger impact than I did initially, which is probably a whole separate discussion as to why. But yeah, so Filter was really an accident. And then when we called them at Costco, I originally called them because I realized they were going to have to supply masks to their customers and to their employees. And this was long before their policy. And so I called in and they said, yeah, we're working on that already. And then like a day later, I got a call from an SVP, which I have to say, as a vendor to Costco, I've been selling them for 20 years. You don't really work above the buyer level. You may get one level above a buyer, not 5 levels above a buyer. And so I'm thinking to myself, why is an SVP from Costco calling me? And it was a fascinating call because it really cemented, not that I needed it, but it cemented in my mind that they are the most ethical company in the world to this day. They called and said, we have a wholesale division that sells into hospital channels, which I had no idea. And they said,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they have a volume purchasing department, which I did know. But what I didn't know is they were supplying through their pharmacy department a number of hospital chains, the largest in the country. And they simply said, I heard you're trying to get masks in. That's not what I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about is our moral obligation to get N95s to the front lines. And he said, tell me about your people on the ground. How do we do this? How do we get it done? And so this was a moral imperative that came from the C-suite. And so that was the first call. And so the whole first 6 months of Filter was not about being a commercial enterprise. I just said, here's my people on the ground. Here's what I can build for you. And what we ended up building was a giant test facility. So you can't test masks without specialized equipment, and you can't tell them apart. The filter membranes in them are not visually different. It could be filtering 0 and you wouldn't know it. And so we went and bought all the test equipment. We built huge packing and test lines out so we can test every single unit we buy. And so that was built in conjunction with this Costco program, where I said, look, I'll build these facilities for you in China. I will validate the quality. We hired compliance people that knew the medical industry. And our aim day one at literally 0 margin for Costco and near 0 for me was simply get N95s to the front lines and save lives. Yeah. And so all the compliance and QC work we did was all around the context of these are people's lives at stake. And so it was kind of an accidental business, but it was really driven out of purpose. I mean, I wasn't thinking, hey, let's build a business out of this. And so once we got that going, then it turned out that Costco decided to carry it in store. And so once that happened, we built these huge facilities out, had trust built, had done a bunch of transactions already in N95s, and we were awarded all of the PPE inline. And so we have 7 pallets. And so Filter is fascinating in the sense it was purpose built, never intended to be a commercial enterprise. It was started just by yanking all my electronics people into this. So I broke out the companies in, I want to say like May, so now they're 2 separate companies. And Filter, today I want to say 75 people, which was staffed over less than 90 days. And as I guarantee you, the fastest company to our revenue in the history of business, knowing what the other fastest.
Wow. And what are these 75 people doing? Like, how do you break them down? How many are in the factory and in manufacturing?
So yeah, there's actually thousands downstream in the factories we subcontract with, but the 75 are here in the US office, which do sales, marketing, finance, and operations, routing freight and selling product. And then in China is where we have most of the people, and they are QC and compliance. And so we've got 30 some quality assurance people.
Wow.
We have test labs that we run, our own internal labs that are basically world-class labs, better than what they have here in the States by far. And we run them internally. So yeah, a lot of compliance, QC testing people.
Wow. And the funding of it, I'm sure that came from yourself and others, no VC.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And actually, it's interesting. At the very beginning, we had, and the financing is a very interesting one here because the factories require prepayment in this industry. So you can't normally you go over there and you build a relationship, you start ordering small quantities, you negotiate terms, and over time you're on standard terms. The PPE business is so crazy, it's all cash up front. And so we have to come up with enormous sums of money. And Ubio Labs had hit a wall. All of our retailers closed in March. Our revenue dropped to zero. And I literally at one point took every dollar we had and I sent it to China in advance to buy N95s.
And is that on contracts or is it like handshake or a combo of?
So there was a contract, but the contract was not between my company and the Chinese vendor because they did not want to sell to America. So I had one of my electronics factories open a new company. He bought them on our behalf so we could obfuscate the destination because they didn't want to sell as long as we're on TV calling it the China virus. And so part of the reason we couldn't get PPE is, keep insulting them and see if they'll sell to you. And so we actually had to use an intermediary, but I literally sent them millions and millions and millions of dollars and did not know if I was going to get product. And had it not worked, I would have bankrupted both companies. And I remember going home and telling my wife, said, hey, she was aware of everything going on. It was, I was working around the clock. We all understood people were dying. The nurses were on TV begging at this time frame on CNN in April. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. And if it doesn't work, both companies are done. It was literally all the chips on the table. And
my gosh.
Yeah, it was pretty extraordinary. And so that first shipment of N95s, we go and we get 1 million plus units and they're all counterfeits. We tested them, they weren't real. Yeah. So I literally have to call Costco and say, hey, I had pictures of the containers being loaded. Everyone was so excited. And it was very subtle and nuanced differences in these products. I mean, it took true experts to see the difference. They just did not come off
my gosh.
They were supposed to.
Well, and back to your integrity and honesty, though, I'm sure that they double down because of their business model and their mentality around their values.
Yep.
It's going to make them be like, you could have easily, nobody would have known.
Nobody would have known. And I remember that SVP, I called him and he said, Jason, he's like, are you going to get your money back? And I said, I don't know.
Did they fund it at all? Did Costco put any money in?
I'm not sure I want to answer that very specifically. What I'll say is that the company was capitalized with about 40 million in outside funding, non-VC, local group of investors that are just debt. And then we did have customer prepayments involved.
Wow.
Yep.
And so you've got you start with the N95s. And since then, we're talking general masks that you're selling, kids masks, infrared thermometers, face shields. Does that all require its own separate kind of equipment, obviously?
Yeah, so what's sitting behind us in Asia is dozens of factories. And so just the shields alone come from 5 or 6 factories because the quantities we make. And so I just did the math the other day. In the first 5 months we've been shipping, we shipped nearly 1 billion individual units of product.
Oh my God.
Yeah, something like 700 million face masks have been shipped in from Filter into the United States. And so there are dozens and dozens of factories behind us. And so we ship everything into our packing lines. We test it, pack it, build pallets at scale. And back in July and August, our peak shipping months, we were shipping 100 sea containers a week. So just
my
huge
goodness.
quantities. And so, yeah, there's dozens of factories sitting behind us.
Yeah. And how many people do you have in your corporate office? What does that infrastructure look like? And does it overlap with Ubio?
Nope, they're totally separate now. Yeah, so Filter in the U.S. office here, I want to say is 31 to 32 people in total.
Wow.
Yeah,
and how many of them are doing sales and biz dev trying to get into other retailers? Or is that all coming from you?
Yeah, no, so we have a sales team. So we have, we also service Target and Best Buy as well. So the 3 customers for Filter are those 3. And then we've sold some states. We do have a government group now that I just brought in. And so they're working on selling the government. And so now we're chasing down the dire nitrile glove shortage. And so the big wall we're about to hit is nitrile gloves. The U.S. National Reserves have literally hours of supply on hand, and they have nothing. And so we've lined up, 6 glove vendors. I think we contacted 300 between Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and China, scouring the globe. We did find 5 vendors. So that's our current project right now is the nitrile glove issue, which is the biggie. But yeah, we do have a government sales group. Majority of the people here are really accounting and operations, routing trucks and planes. And I would say half the team, but I've also got, head of compliance and regulations here, product development staff, product marketing staff that does all the packaging and pallet designs.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's a very skinny team up for the size of business we are.
Yeah. I love that you're so, I mean, maybe you're not calm. I'm sure internally you're like spinning, but your external clarity is so unique. It really is like your kind of ninja skill, just being like, I'm clear. I know where the need is, and I'm going to double down and get after it.
I like to aim, some people say,
clearly,
measure twice, cut once. I always like to tell people, hey, we're going to aim here. And so, yeah, I don't put up with a lot of sort of maybes and ifs. I'm like, get the data. Let's understand what we're doing. Let's make a plan and then measure that plan. I'm pretty linear in that sense. Certainly when I get to product design and like Ubio, I'm emotionally driven because it's, we're trying to make beautiful, emotive product.
Yeah.
Here, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is filling a dire need with the highest quality product where people's lives are at stake. So
right. And it's kind of like we're either doing it or we're not. It's not very gray.
Yeah, and we decided day one, we're going to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. There's a lot of bad actors in this industry, let me tell you. And this is a zero trust industry. And lots of stories about that. Nobody trusts anybody.
Yeah.
And so day one, like we market, medical grade masks to the general public. And they will pass, the highest level of testing to get, 510K approvals from the FDA, and they can be used in an actual operating room. Yeah. And that's the level of product that we sell, because at the end of the day, not doing so implies that not everybody's lives requires that level of product, right? And that's not a decision we're willing to make. So yeah, day one, we said we're going to be part of the solution for real. And what that means is that we're either offering the best possible product that money can buy at reasonable prices that are accessible, or we're not going to play. I mean, we will not be part of the problem here. There's enough problems with COVID and how we got here.
And how have you been thinking about the impact on the environment of these masks?
Yeah, so we have been thinking about it. We've done some research studies. They are made out of polypropylene, which is technically recyclable. And so to the extent that you were to remove the elastic ear loops, the body of the material, all three layers, is polypropylene and can be recycled.
So we can put it in our recycle at home?
No, not so simple. The problem is because if you've worn it, it is technically biohazard, right? So the problem is actually in the U.S. recycling infrastructure. They are technically recyclable. I don't think you would want to just put them in your recycling, because I think the recipient on the other end doesn't have the proper equipment to receive it and process it. And so, yeah, we have talked about that a lot with people, that it is technically recyclable. How many of the U.S. recycling plants can handle polypropylene is unknown to me. But you would have to have, I think, a biohazard supply chain if you want to be safe about it, and say, how would you collect these things at scale, and then which facilities in America could actually recycle them. But it's technically feasible. It's just not a solved problem right now.
Yeah, interesting. And so I know that you've extended your big commitment to giving back. How did you choose which organization? I researched it, Millions of Masks for Children campaign. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so that is, it was kind of serendipitous, actually. I was talking to somebody who was part of a different charity in town here, and their mission was to try to help the states do demand planning for their PPE needs. So the states and the local governments, their procurement process pre-COVID doesn't really work post-COVID for a number of reasons. It's just a broken supply chain coupled with a broken procurement process. So they were working on solving that. And so they were talking to us as a potential supplier to the states. In the course of that conversation, they mentioned they were trying to get a donation program running. So I immediately changed the topic and said, hey, we've been looking for somebody to receive our donations. We've been donating from day one. And I said, look, they said, we want to do 1 million masks for kids. And I said, done. And they were like, what? I said, yeah, no problem. I'll give you 1 million right now. You figure out the last mile, how to get them in the hands of kids in need, and I'll give you as much product as you need. And so Millions of Masks for Kids arose out of that conversation. And so Jang is the person who runs Millions of Masks for Kids. And so she handles all the last mile. So she started the initiative. She brought in SmartAid as another resource. I believe they're based in Israel. And she's the one that handles all the relationships last mile. And so far we've donated 3 million kids masks in the last 8 weeks or so, million bottles of kids sanitizers, and more coming. And so that initiative is really something that makes just important to all of us, that, anybody that reached out to me from February forward, doctors or hospital chains, we just donated, and so they would say, hey, I've got 4 hospitals in Ohio, I can't get anything. We would just send them thousands of N95s, and they would send us videos back and the nurses cheering. So we've always had a giving component here, because we realized that we couldn't reach everybody. We couldn't sell to everybody. Our supply chain is geared towards big customers, but we certainly could bring in lots of extra product. And everyone knew that if you just emailed me, if I had product, I would send it out.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of word of mouth initially. And I think on the Millions of Masks for Kids, the idea is that, there's a lot of underprivileged kids that were already struggling. They relied on the school districts to provide meals.
Totally.
The parents relied on those kids going to school to go to work.
Totally.
And so,
yeah, it's a big problem.
It is going to be a conversation going on for a long time, is that we have the income disparity, the wage gaps already, the underprivileged in this country are already, it was a widening gap. And now all of a sudden you have a gap that is probably going to be double what it was prior to COVID.
Yeah.
All the kids that are in certain areas just, parents gave them a laptop, gave them an iPad, they're in virtual schooling. That's not possible for a lot of people in America. And so that's why we wanted to attack that, is that, and there's a lot of great organizations working on sort of filling the gap in just, basic nutritional needs, right? Is that, and I think they're months now waiting to sort of fill that gap, because I think 25% of school kids relied on meal programs to get them paid, and that dropped off. And so at the very least, what we can do is get millions of masks out there for kids that can least afford them, which is what we're doing. And so Millions of Masks for Kids handles all the last mile for us. So we just basically say, hey, we'll bring in 1 million units. Where do you want them? And they just did an event last week in Utah. The first 1 million was up here in Seattle. We gave a bunch to Washington State, Children's Hospital, University of Washington Medicine. And then she lined up, a bunch of the tribal and minority groups that received donations. And then I want to say YMCA was in there, Boys and Girls Club. And so she's actually doing all the hard work. I just bring in container loads and deliver to her. And so we've got the 3rd million showing up first week of February. And so I think that's
incredible.
And that'll be handled by the Red Cross, I believe. So they're doing distribution in California. So now that California's sort of got this huge outbreak, we're focusing on getting stuff to California.
Yeah.
And so, it's a simple initiative. It's just we're in a position to help, and we are. It's kind of simple as it is, really.
Always amazing and inspiring. And I don't think enough people think like that. Just the giving back part ingrained into a culture. And I think it's an obligation.
It is an obligation. I've learned a lot about human nature during Filter. I thought I'd learned what I need to know in business, but I was proven wrong. Filter has taught me a lot of lessons I wish I had not learned. I tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, just in interviewing you alone, obviously you're high energy, you're focused. And it sounds like going into your production studio and working out help you kind of decompress and relax. But I'm curious if you have kind of a spiritual practice.
I used to. I don't necessarily anymore. Certainly I studied theology for a number of years, pretty in depth.
Well, that's why I brought it up, because I heard you say that at the beginning.
And my brother is an Orthodox priest, as a matter of fact. So I spent a lot of time in seminaries. One of my most amazing trips I ever made in all my travel was to Istanbul, and I went and stayed in a monastery off the coast of Istanbul, which has very significant historical sort of issues there for the Orthodox. Istanbul used to be Constantinople, which was the sort of head of the Byzantine Empire and the sort of head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So I used to be very deeply engaged. And I will say that I think all those years, I took a lot of lessons from that. And certainly there's a lot of wisdom there about the heart and the soul that is not found any other place. It's certainly become part of who I am. Today, I'm not actively attending church anymore and actively engaged in that life, but I certainly think all those principles and values are present and are manifesting themselves in different ways in my life right now.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think a lot of my recharging also, the studio and working out is kind of self-check, because I also have, 2 toddlers at home and an amazing wife that are really my foundation. In the end, since I met my wife, it gets about 9 years ago now, my life has just been infinitely better than prior to meeting her. And so,
wow, you're earning points between the jewelry and the podcast. I'm sure she'll listen to this.
Oh, everyone in my company hears about it nonstop. They're always like, my God, this guy adores his wife. It's like nauseating. We don't want to hear about it anymore. No, she's
so
an incredible woman, though.
That's amazing. Well, that doesn't surprise me. And so what kind of values would you say that you're bringing into your family? And are you deliberate about that? It sounds like you are.
I would say that we are deliberate. And I will also say that, I was raised by an ethnic mother from Greece. I lived in Greece for many years, deep in the Orthodox community for a long time. And so I've got a cultural set of values that are present. I was raised mostly in America, but my value system really, I think, was more formed by Greek Orthodoxy and the sort of Greek way of looking at the world. My wife is actually an immigrant as well. She's from Iran, as a matter of fact.
Oh, so is my husband.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Does she make the Tahdig?
She does. Yeah. Well, when my mother-in-law is in town, that's when things get serious.
Yeah. Same with my mother-in-law.
I'm not
I'm
allowed
like,
to go anywhere near the kitchen
yeah.
when my mother-in-law is here. You know, they
Yeah,
got
that's
some very serious
exactly. And my
things.
kids are so happy. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't deliver the same thing. It's like a
Yeah.
7 course and it's just natural for her. She's like, well, I've been doing this for 30, 40
And
years.
I've never seen a meal harder to make than a Persian meal. I mean,
Yeah,
my Lord, they'll spend 10 hours in there.
I know. I know.
It's
And
amazing.
it's a happy place. It's a big part of the culture is around food. Actually, most cultures, but especially the Persian culture and around music,
Yep.
which I love.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that we got a lot of cultural values in my home. And so,
Hmm.
how do you look at it? Two very ancient cultures? I mean, Greeks and Persians, I mean, these are very ancient cultures that have set ways of thinking about things that I would say are opposed to the prevailing views in America, to put it
Hmm.
safely.
Well,
Uh,
and very much centered around the family.
Yep. Yeah. Family, a little bit more traditional values. And my wife didn't come here until she was 14. And
Oh,
so being
wow.
raised in Tehran till you're 14 has an impact on your view of the world, on your belief.
Oh, huge. And so she speaks Farsi,
Oh yeah,
obviously.
absolutely.
And are you teaching the kids Farsi?
I wish she would. She does speak in the Farsi, but normally when she's angry,
Yeah.
I don't know what she's
My kids
saying.
only know bastani, which is like ice cream.
Yeah, she's screwing up a storm in Farsi, and I'm assuming neither of us want to know, the kid nor I want to know what she's actually saying. But I was told the other day she should actually speak to them in Farsi more often because their minds are a sponge right now.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm like, tell my husband, I'm like, I really wish we had when we were in New York raising the kids the first several years as toddlers. Their grandparents spoke Farsi to them a lot, and then of course they've forgotten a lot of it, and I've forgotten a lot of it because I just picked it
There
up
though.
naturally. Yeah, no, it's
It's
there.
there.
It's
If I
somewhere
get
in
back in
there.
Greece, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm not conversational in Greek, but you get me there for like 2 weeks and it all comes back. It's
Yeah.
there because my mother spoke to me in Greek as a child. And so I think once
Hmm.
it's there, it's there.
I mean, hopefully we can travel next year. I'm turning 50, and I have Greece on my bucket list. I've never been,
Ah,
and I'm dying to go. And I have a few Greek friends who have given me the kind of off the beaten track little islands to check
mhm.
out, and I just cannot wait to go. I hope it's next year,
I hope
but I
so
will
too.
be going within the next few years
It's
for
amazing.
sure.
The
Yeah, and
Greek
you've been to
islands.
some really cool places. I'm sure that travel is on your list of
ah,
first thing you'll
oh,
do
I miss it so much.
besides the, hugging.
Yeah, yeah, I miss it a lot. I mean,
I
I
do
traveled
too.
extensively. I mean, all over the place. And I would go to the ancient sort of hubs of the world because I'd go read like history and then be like, oh, I'm going to go to Rome. I'm going to go to, Athens. I'm going to go to Istanbul. And
Yeah.
so, have a little historical sort of information about where you're at. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's the thing I
Makes
miss
it
the
so
most.
much richer. And so are there rituals that help keep you grounded and focused? Like I've asked people that, and some people are like, yeah, no, I work out or I, have my gratitude practice or, whatever it is. I drink my,
Yeah,
coffee.
I mean, I'm a creature of habit. I mean, I'm a super early riser. I would say about 7, 8 years ago, my lifestyle got really sort of clean, if you will. I mean,
I
I
was
don't
going to
go
say, are you going
out.
to say clean?
Yeah, I don't drink. I mean, it's not like I try to stop drinking. It just isn't part of my life. I have to have such a high
It
intensity
slows you
level.
down.
Yeah, it does. It slows you down. It sort of clouds your mind. So yeah, I mean, I sleep well, work out. Spend a lot of time with the kids. I do my best to eat healthy. I'm probably the worst thing I do is how I eat. But yeah, just read a lot. I'm
That's
a
a
person
hard
about
one.
routines. But I'm pretty set in my ways in business as far as what principles I run a business by, what we're trying to achieve. And that's very clear in both businesses. I think everyone can always tell you what are the top three things. Every day I get up and I spend the first morning, hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning by myself. I get up at like 4:30 to 5. And that's when I'm just like, the only quiet time I have is that hour and a half before the kids get up, before work starts. Because then after that, it's all devoted to like my team during the day. And then, afternoon and evenings, all about my kids and wife. And so that's my alone time. So I do need that couple hours of silence and I get it really early. And so as a result, I go to bed early. So I mean, it's a pretty simple lifestyle, really. Just go to bed early. Don't, put garbage in your body, work
Yeah.
out, get up super early and think about your day. Every day I have lists. I mean, outside of our product management systems, I write down my list because I just something tactile about writing that commits it to memory. And if I have a list, I'm going to get down with that day. I'm just hyper focused that here's the 5 things I must get done today.
Yeah.
And I know what that is
Wow.
every morning by 5 a.m., like what my key focus is going to be. And then I just go about the day of being as efficient as possible as getting through that. Don't let people distract me. And so I think time management when you have two companies is kind of key.
Oh, yeah.
You can't have like people just, barging in or.
Well, especially when you're working with international geographies, your hours are probably all jacked up and all confusing.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, we have our calls with Asia, our Chinese ops at like 4 or 5, depending on daylight savings time. So I'm usually done by, 5 or 6. Try to make it so I can have dinner with the kids every night.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just kind of a rule-based life that, hey, here's when we get done. This is when I'm leaving. I started having people like schedule, they do hour meetings by default. And I'm telling them, hey guys, like nothing is really worth an hour, right? Generally. Like
except for this podcast.
This one's we're going to do 2 or 3 more in the end. So it's probably 4 hours worth. But
exactly. I know we haven't even scratched the surface. Like you are fascinating. Like for real. My ultimate question that I ask everyone at the end is what fuels you?
What fuels me right now is a work in process. I am no longer satisfied with just success in a business, if that makes sense. So, once you're into your 4th or 5th business that'll have really good financial results, high growth rates, highly effective teams, you start to look at it and go, hey, this kind of feels like Groundhog Day. Like launching yet another consumer good into a big retailer is not that interesting anymore to me. Looking and standing back and saying, you got these businesses, they provide great products, they're profitable, lots of people are employed. Yeah, of course, all that's great. But I'm actually trying to define what the next phase of my life is all about, because Filter is so big. I mean, it's literally 10 times the size of Ubio Labs in months. And so at some point I'll tell that full story, how big the company is so fast. It's crazy. After that, like, what else can I do at this point? And I'm starting to really ask myself that question, what will drive me moving forward? And I don't think it's going to be business. I think it's going to be some combination of how do I make an impact? How do I teach people what I know, share my experiences, because they were hard earned, if you will. And I rather someone else learn from my mistakes than have to make their own. And then the last part is how do you make the world a little bit better place than how you found it when you're done? And launching another piece of electronics into Verizon or Costco is not going to achieve that goal. And so this, some new friends I made through Filter because it's attracted some different kind of people. And these are the things I'm talking to them about is, what does life look like after this, right? There's a vaccine now, how long, maybe a year more we're going to be in this business, which is great. Happy to shut the damn thing down after COVID's done. But what comes then? And I actually don't have an answer for you right now.
Yeah.
It's going to have meaning, though. It's not going to be another dollar or another product.
Well, I love that. And I think that that's such a sign of maturity and very clearly represents your values and your ethics. And I'm super huge gratitude to you for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. Yeah. I love stuff like this. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.